Hello and welcome back to Some Room to Grow. My name is Greg Walgast. It's been great to see a lot of new subscribers to the channel recently, so to all of you newcomers, welcome to Some Room to Grow. Today I'm going to be bending some pipes to make hoops to support our new row covers. I've built a pipe bending contraption using only materials that I already had on hand, and as ugly as it is, I'd like to show you that. And I also want to share a simple formula that you can use to determine the length of the curved portion of any size hoop. So no matter what project you're working on, whether it's a small tunnel like this, or a big greenhouse, or an airplane hangar, if that's your thing, you can use that formula to figure it out. So some of you may know that formula already, but for those of you who don't, please stay tuned to find out. So rather than leave you in suspense, let's just get right into the formula right off the bat. So the formula for determining the curved portion of a half circle like this is pi r. In plain English, that is the number pi, which is approximately 3.14, multiplied by r, the radius. So that's derived from the formula for the circumference of a full circle, which is 2 times pi times r. If we work out that, we would have to divide that result by 2 anyway to get just the curve of the half circle. So we could just drop the 2 from that equation and we get pi times the radius. So in our example, we are covering 4.5 feet of width here with this row cover. So think of that like the diameter of the circle. So we cut that in half for the radius to 2.25. We multiply that by the number pi, 3.14, and we get a little over 7. So that means we have 7 feet of curve on this hoop. Since these pipes are 10 feet when you buy them, that means we have about 1.5 feet on either end that will still be straight. We can use that to push down onto the rebar stakes that we've hammered into the soil. So there you go. That's an easy formula that you can use to figure out the curved portion of any size hoop, whatever you're working on. And it's really good to know that so you can determine how much pipe you're going to need to cover that whole distance. I wanted to make sure that these would be high enough to go over our hugelkultur beds, which are of course raised up a little bit. I wanted to give the plants enough space inside there once they start growing. So we just got the one covered so far. We need to do the other 2. So here is my homemade DIY pipe bender. As I said, it's not very attractive, but didn't have to buy any of the materials to make it, and it gets the job done, so that works for me. So I had a piece of 1/2-inch scrap plywood in the garage from when we had our roof redone a few years ago. So I measured out and cut a chunk off of that and made sure I would have enough to fit the 4.5-foot span within that with a little bit on the ends, and then marked a center point of 2.25 feet, 27 inches, and put a screw in there, tied a string onto that, and measured out to the 2.25 and attached a pencil, and then worked around drawing an arc all around here, and I used the measuring tape to make sure that that was staying at an even length all the way around. So I may have made a mistake there in that I forgot to account for the width of the pipe actually. So I measured that all at 27 inches and put the screws in there. So when the pipe is bent, it's on the outside of those screws rather than being centered on there. So I ran into that issue once I was testing it out, and I marked 1.5 feet. As I said, there's 1.5 feet on either end with 7 feet of curve in the middle. So I marked that at 1.5 and tried bending it and found that it was a bit shorter when I got over to this end. So I don't know if that was necessarily because of that, if it would make that much of a difference, but that's all I can really think about to cause any kind of discrepancy there. So that's something to keep in mind. Be aware of that you may need to bring it in a little bit. So I put in screws every few inches couple of inches or so and put a lot more at the beginning and the end to account for that extra force there. And then I attached a 2x4 with a little extra off the end, and I decided to use some carriage bolts for those just because I had some laying around and I wanted to make sure that that would be really secure on there. I'm not sure if that's totally necessary, but I think it's holding up really well. And then just be careful once you get all these screws through there, they may be poking out the other side depending on how thick of a board you're using. And then I'm doing this on the ground like this to have enough room to sweep it around. And so I decided to put some stakes with rebar in the ground, just drilled some holes just to hold that in place, because this does put quite a bit of force as you're bending that pipe. It might be a little easier if you are able to mount this up on a wall on the side of a barn or greenhouse or something. So just keep in mind that you will need to have space to be able to sweep that pipe around as you bend it. All right, so I think we are ready to bend some pipe. So I've got these marked at 1.5 feet. Like I said, we've got 1.5 on either end with 7 feet in the middle. But as I was saying before, it's a little bit of an issue with the way I set this up. You might not have this problem if you do it properly. So I'm actually setting this up a few inches extra from where I marked that on there, just so that it's long enough once it gets to the other end. So doing this on the ground is a little tricky to work your way around. I'm sure this is much easier if you can do it on a wall or something, but just kind of bend your way around. Try not to kneel on any screws or anything. Give it some nice extra, because it wants to spring back. So just to account for that spring there, I'm going to pull it out and carefully put a foot down, and then just carefully bend it down the rest of the way. Try to get the straight ends more parallel to each other. And careful not to kink it anywhere up in here. So that looks pretty good. And of course, once these go down onto the rebar stakes, that will help to keep that pulled in a bit. So there you go. Looks pretty good. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be. You know, we're using a homemade pipe bender, so it's not going to be ideal, but it's just supporting row cover fabric to go over the top, so it doesn't have to be exact. It's got a curve. That works for me. So let's go ahead and do the rest of them. All right, so the hoops are all in and they're ready for fabric, but I'm not even gonna try to fight against this wind today to put more fabric on, so I'll have to wait for another day to do that. But in the meantime, we are hardening off the first seedling transplants to come out here. We've got broccoli, cabbage, and kale. So in a few days, some nicer weather, we'll be able to get those out here, so I'll come back and show you that. All right, it's been a few days and we've been able to get all of our brassica seedlings transplanted out here. And yeah, I know they are a bit discolored still right now because I have not perfected my seed starting process. I'm sure it has something to do with not getting them enough of the proper nutrients as they get started, and they start taking a lot of those nutrients from the older leaves. They get more red and purplish and lose their color, kind of die off. So at least now that they are out here in this healthy soil, they're looking much better. The new growth is much more green, so they should be much happier. For my next video, I am going to give an update on the hugelkultur beds, because I've had a few of you asking about those. So I'm going to just talk about how they're doing, how they've survived over the winter, what we did to keep them going, and what we plan to do with them now in this new growing season. So keep an eye out for that. Should be out in a couple weeks, and I'll see you then.